Konami jumps into the mini console game with the PC Engine Mini, and we've managed to get our hands on one. So does it have anything to offer beyond what we've come to expect from these plug-and-play emulation boxes? So the PC Engine Mini is finally out in the wild, but unfortunately, as of right now, it's just the PC Engine Mini. The equivalent Core Graphics Mini and the TurboGrafx 16 Mini are not yet released because of production difficulties due to the current pandemic. But if you pre-order the PC Engine Mini within a certain time frame, they did have enough available to ship those out, but Coury did get his, so he's the man who's got the experience here.
That's right. I did a live stream the other night where I unboxed it and checked it out, along with about 600 other people. Apparently it's going to be Amazon exclusive in Japan and in the US. It sells for about $100. The PC Engine Mini that I got was $110 shipped from Amazon Japan.
You don't even have a PC Engine to actually compare it to, at least the original small model. I have those, but it's not really that much smaller than the actual PC Engine, is it?
It was much more appealing to me just having the smaller unit. I can't compare them side by side, but from everything that I've seen, they're very, very similar in size. Basically, it's a almost one-to-one recreation of the PC Engine. There's a couple of notable differences. There's no ports on the side, obviously, for AV out or power. Those have been moved to the back. Behind the external bus flap, which actually comes off, and then you have the HDMI out and USB power. One thing I did like is that when you power on the system, the little tab that holds the Hue card in on an original system is there as well. It's kind of interesting that Konami was the one that released this, because you never think of Konami being like releasing hardware, you know?
Right, and NEC is kind of scrubbed from the whole thing.
I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense that they would do that, but I mean, it's kind of sad. And it comes with one controller, which is based on the very original PC Engine controller, which means there is no turbo switches on it at all.
That's almost kind of like how in the US we got the 3-button Genesis controller and people complained about that. I think that was the pack-in because of nostalgia reasons, and maybe that was the thinking behind doing it with the PC Engine Mini, no turbo on it, but I mean, come on, I feel like that's kind of an essential part of the system.
You can buy extra controllers for it, and they are the ones with turbo switches on it.
But at least the controller cord is much longer, and the system has 2 controller ports. They're just USB, of course, but the original had a very short controller cord and only 1 input. If you wanted to play multiplayer games, you had to have a multi-tap. So what did you think of the controller? I mean, obviously neither of us have held a brand new PC Engine controller before.
I thought it felt really good. It's a little bit stiffer, I think, than an original controller. You know, the buttons are not quite as spongy. It does feel a lot lighter and maybe feels a little bit cheaper.
So as far as I know, it's pretty much just like the other Mini or Classic Edition consoles where you plug it in with USB, you've got your HDMI cord, and you turn it on, you've got 720p output to your HD TV, and that's that, right?
Yeah, basically. I mean, it's just plug and play. Right away, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised by just like how lavish the menu system was, because there's just a lot of personality here.
You can also switch the menu system to have like a TurboGrafx interface, much like you can change the language on the Genesis Mini to have like Mega Drive or Genesis display.
Here, it's more built into the entire interface. You can go to the lower right-hand corner and select TurboGrafx 16 or PC Engine, and it will change it over to that layout, and it will have games that are specific to that region. Hidden deeper within the menu is the option to change the PC Engine menu to a Core Graphics menu. So it switches from white to a dark gray and blue.
Which we should point out that this was handled by M2, just like the Genesis Mini was. So, you know, kind of their love and care for these games, I think, shines through in that interface.
Maybe this is just my opinion and the way that the menu feels versus the Genesis Mini, but I really felt that there was a lot of care put into the menus and a lot of personality. And it was clear that maybe the people who worked on it at M2 were excited to be working on something that wasn't just focused on the Genesis.
Yeah, and I mean, the PC Engine was an extremely popular console in Japan, and it's great that this is kind of getting a worldwide release eventually anyway, because it's probably like the best system that people in the West have like the least experience with.
What's really cool is when you boot up a game, it has a little animation where it shows the hue card being put into the system. But if you play a CD game, it puts in the Super System card and then it shows the CD-ROM booting up. You can access an in-game menu by holding down Start and Run at the same time. And there's, of course, 4 save slots, which is customary for these plug-and-play devices.
So when you compare like the Genesis Mini and the PC Engine Mini to like, say, the ones that Nintendo did, or even the PlayStation Classic, the biggest advantage, I guess, is just like this sheer selection of games. There are a lot of games that M2 packed into the Genesis Mini and the PC Engine Mini.
There is over 50 games, more around 60. Not only is there standard PC Engine hue card games, but also Super CD-ROM games and Super Graphics games.
But like, the way they count it is kind of weird, because aren't some of them kind of duplicates where you've got like the American version and the Japanese version, and they kind of count them as adding to the total?
For all intents and purposes, outside of a couple of like outliers, the library is exactly the same between Japan and the US. So you have a bunch of PC Engine games, and then you have a smaller selection of TurboGrafx games. There's some games that are only available on the TurboGrafx 16 side and only available on the PC Engine side. But a lot of the games don't even have any sort of language barriers.
But at least there are some nice kind of more expensive games, like Newtopia 2 is on there, which is, you know, not one of the most expensive games on the system, but it is cool to have a game like that, and I think there's several others on there that are pretty expensive.
There is some super expensive games on here. It almost makes me wish that they had included even more. I'm not sure if they had the rights to it, but I mean, specifically Sapphire.
And then we've got like Castlevania Rondo of Blood, which is also an expensive game if you want the original version, but it's not really as special as it used to be, because they have luckily released it in numerous forms over the years. So that game in particular is not necessarily incentive to buy this, because there are better ways to play Rondo of Blood than on the PC Engine Mini, I would think, at this point.
But as always, you know, it's cool to see Ys Book 1 and 2 on here, because that is probably like maybe my favorite game on the system. There is 4 hidden games that I know of as of right now. If you hold down Select and press Run on either Fantasy Zone and Gradius, it will boot up a near arcade perfect version that they've rebuilt, and it has all new soundtrack, new graphics, and they're incredible. For a lot of people, those might be the reason to get the system.
I think one of the interesting things is that people tend to think of the PC Engine library as very shooter heavy, and I think this library could be a good opportunity for people to kind of explore, like, what is the PC Engine? What is this library like? And I think you might be surprised that there could be a lot more for you on the system than you think. But I think most people are probably watching our video in particular because they want to hear us talk about, you know, integer scales and non-integer scales, and does it shimmer when it scrolls, and stuff like that. So what do we got on the video options side?
You have 5 total options, and probably 2 or 3 of them are the only ones that matter. On the PC Engine Mini, you have 2 specific screen size settings that cater to the 256 pixel wide games, which is the majority of the games on the system. One of them is a 3x vertical scale and a 3x horizontal scale.
So that would give you square pixels, which technically, you know, if you're going by how those games would be displayed on a CRT, that actually makes them too skinny.
You look at the library on here, and a lot of them are vertically scrolling shooters. And that more narrow aspect doesn't really affect that. And it just takes a little while to get used to.
But I guess a lot of people who maybe have tried these games on an emulator or something like that, they aren't used to seeing what they look like on original hardware. That sort of skinnier aspect ratio might be how a lot of people are used to seeing it. It's not correct, but it's one of the better options I think you have available here from what I saw.
It is not the default option, but I feel it's the best. You also have an option that is a 3x vertical scale, and takes that horizontal scale and slightly stretches it so it's a more typical 4:3 aspect that we're used to. But what that means is that you're going to have like the typical shimmering that you would expect. I was hoping that would make a couple of the games on the system that ran at 320 pixels wide. I was hoping that would make it so that those games were integer scales, like Ease Book 1 and 2 and Ghouls and Ghosts, but alas, it did not. There's one more. Obviously, this is the one that probably a lot of people will choose, and it's just the one that maintains the 4:3 aspect, but also stretches out the top and bottom to fill out the rest of the screen as well. And stretching that to fill out the vertical also introduces vertically scrolling Shimmer, which really affects a lot of the vertically scrolling shooters on the system, like Soldier Blade.
But I think you're right. I think the average person probably will choose that. And, it's hard for me to unsee the shimmer, but maybe the average person won't notice or won't be bothered by it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the average person doesn't care. And of course, you have the 16:9 stretch that just fills up the entire screen with the stretched out game. There's a really cool overlay of the Turbo Express, and it shrinks down the screen and puts a filter on it. And it's definitely more of a novelty. It's fun to look at, and it's like, hey, that's pretty neat. But I can't think of anybody who would actually want to play a game seriously using that. It's just more of to bring a smile to your face.
I actually didn't know this. There are some games that don't run at 256 pixels wide on the PC Engine.
The thing that a lot of people have been calling out was R-Type. And some other people have talked about Shimmer in R-Type. And essentially, the reason that there's Shimmer on all graphical modes in that is because the US version in particular, which is on the system, runs at 336 pixels wide, which means that any of the screen sizes you switch to is going to be wrong, and you're going to get Shimmer no matter what. Like the one size fits all screen sizing, it works for a majority of the games on the system, but certain ones like R-Type are going to have these issues. But I don't know if this is possible, but I wonder if there's just a way where it could either detect the game's internal resolution and just multiply that, or just make it so that they tweak it on a per game basis.
It's a shame that interpolation doesn't seem to exist on any of these mini consoles except for like the Super Nintendo Mini has interpolation, so you can have that 4:3 aspect ratio and the shimmering is greatly minimized. And everyone knows we love the guys at M2. We really respect what they do and the passion that they put into their stuff. But the thing that I am most hard on them, and to be fair, a lot of people who are doing this kind of work right now, why do we not have interpolation? And what I don't understand about that is that there is that scanline filter option, which does blur the image a little bit, which to me tells me that the processing power on this system on a chip that's powering the PC Engine Mini should have the power to just do a little bit of horizontal blur, just get rid of that shimmer, and you could have the correct aspect ratio. So unfortunately that's not there, but what did you think about the CRT option?
It's a lot better than the Genesis Minis, which added a whole some noise into the image as well. This is just a pretty clean bilinear filter with scan lines over it, but for all intents and purposes, I mean, it's serviceable. I wish that they would just add in maybe a little bit of gamma boost to it so that it kind of gives it that glow. I think that would go a long way in making it pop and be more appealing for a lot of people. But I mean, you have choices for different backgrounds. You know, although I prefer just like a black background. I've been a little harsh on M2 recently because on the Switch they are releasing their Sega Ages, and they do have an option for a black background, but it has a slight gray gradient on it, and it just like annoys me so much.
But so video options aside, like PC Engine, that is one of the systems that I feel tends to have the most poorly emulated sound. You know, in addition to how does it sound, what was the sound lag like? Because that's another issue that is almost universal with a lot of these official emulations, but it does vary in severity from system to system.
Yeah, I mean, it was very apparent on the Genesis Mini and the NES Mini. I didn't feel it was that apparent on the Super NES Mini, but it does rear its ugly head again here. But its level of severity from game to game varies. I mean, it was very obvious in Bonk. When you do the headbutt, you know, you hear it after almost the entire animation is finished. But I mean, especially in shooters, where there's so much going on, you're not gonna notice it. I'm not sure if this has anything to do with the hardware that they're using.
It's just really hard to understand, I guess, all of the economics that go into producing this kind of hardware and what level of power it really is and that kind of thing. So do you feel that the actual quality of the sound was up to snuff or not?
I mean, I don't have the ear for it like I do for Genesis games, but I mean, for the most part, I thought it sounded pretty good. There's little bits of attention to detail that I wasn't aware of, and our good friend Artemio Urbina told us about, was in the game Ninja Spirit. Due to a programming flaw with the game, there is some noise that you hear when the game is loading or you pause. You will hear just like this kind of high-pitched noise, and this was represented in the PC Engine Mini. Some sound effects might be slightly off. I was testing the sword thrust from Newtopia, and at first I thought like, oh, that sounds like it probably would be wrong on real hardware, but it was really close.
So then I guess the last technical aspect that we really need to get into is input lag, which tends to be an unavoidable reality on many consoles. I mean, you know, emulation, unless you take some really specific measures to work around it, is going to have some kind of lag. So how playable is it in your opinion?
So I didn't do any specific lag testing myself. The things that are going around online right now are these tests done by Chris Tang, who is known for being a professional gamer, esports personality, and also a PC Engine super fan. So he did some tests at 120 frames per second between another emulator and the PC Engine Mini, and based on his findings, came out to about 3 to 5 frames of lag.
Which sounds like a lot.
I didn't feel it was super noticeable on a lot of games, but one thing I did not know that Chris found out via his testing is that some of these games have several frames of lag just built into the game. But the real problem occurs when you take the game's latent input lag and apply those 3 to 5 frames on top of it, so it just compounds that lag. I personally found Lords of Thunder to be almost near unplayable.
And, you know, just the fact that the lag is there might make people even question a game like Bonk, especially if they've never played Bonk before. They might think like, ooh, this is really laggy. Bonk has a weird sort of speed to his movement, so that's kind of a weird case even on original hardware. So it could distort how people perceive games like Bonk.
a lot of the vertically scrolling shooters. I had no problem with blazing lasers, or I had no problem with Soldier Blade.
So it sounds like it's... I'm reluctant to say maybe a little disappointing, but it might kind of be. But, you know, we know that these mini consoles aren't really made for us in particular, but the PC Engine kind of fulfills a unique position because it's a lot more hardcore, I guess you could say, than the other mini consoles that exist, at least in this part of the world where it was not very popular and is more embraced by a hardcore sort of community.
But it almost makes me wish that they had made it more specific to a hardcore audience this time around. Just not down to the included games, but also the options, the game options, like the scaling options. I wish that they had maybe just aimed a little bit more specifically towards the hardcore, because that is the people who are going to buy this versus just like a casual audience.
In Japan, where it was very popular, I could see, you know, this being a thing that people will like to pick up. And I think for this audience, it is a good way to get some familiarity with a curated library of PC Engine games. But I do like these mini consoles as like something that you can just like grab off your shelf if you're going to like have a get together with family or something like that. It's just a good thing to take to like a family gathering where maybe you want to introduce some people to some games that they don't have a lot of familiarity with. Like I used the Genesis Mini to expose my cousin's son to some Genesis games, and he had a great time with it. And it's so easy to just hook up at anyone's house. You can use the USB port that's just on their TV. So they are very handy in that way. I feel they're good sort of, I guess, gateways to kind of bring people into awareness of some of these older games, and especially in the case of the PC Engine, maybe a little more obscure.